Dear class, before you begin your meditation on Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse, I'd like to remind you of some of the themes that have come up during our Zoom meeting about the novel. It's a novel which is seen as, in some respects, difficult. It may be that it's hard to concentrate on because of the absence of a linear narrative that would grab your attention and create suspense, because of the celebrated move from the consciousness of many different characters from each to each, especially during the famous dinner party scene where you jump from mind to mind in a way that is not as relaxed and informal in the tradition of the novel, where a stream of consciousness belongs usually to one person, to one figure, one character, and not to everybody. So that is a novelty, and it may be uncomfortable to read, or it may be that time has brought that closer to us in familiarity, and that we're not as challenged by it as we might once have been if we were reading this book 100 years ago. So there are unfamiliar aspects to the book, and also familiar ones. We have a great many characters that we can spend time with and come to understand, identify with in different ways. We do have an overarching suspense structure, which is established for us right at the beginning of the book by the Ramsay's son James and his desire to get to reach the lighthouse that they can see from their annual holiday, their annual vacation home. This home in reality was down in the southwest of Britain, at the town of St. Ives in Cornwall. In the book, it has been thrust into the far north of the British Isles onto the Isle of Skye, but the landscape is much the same as it was for the author during her childhood vacations. And it happened that she didn't vary the number of characters very much from the autobiographical reality. There were, in fact, 8 children present, for the most part, most frequently at the Stephen, this is her father's name, so Leslie Stephen, at the Stevens vacation home. There were not 8 children by Virginia and Vanessa's parents, but what with stepchildren and Vanessa's blood siblings, there were in fact 8 children there, and there were many visitors who, much in the style of the intelligentsia of an earlier age, although I dare say it still happens, where if there was a member of a circle of friends and acquaintances who had a holiday home, I keep having to struggle to remember that Americans call it a vacation. We call that a holiday, not what you call a holiday. Our holiday equals your word vacation. So their holiday home, as it would have been termed in Britain, if any member of a group of friends had such a home, they would tend to invite their friends to come and join them. And I had that good fortune of being surrounded by that when I was a child. And my parents belonged to a large circle of friends who were all, like them, actors. And I was the only child. I was just the one out of representing the entire 8 in this book and in Virginia Woolf's childhood. There was just me, and so I was the focus of attention of an enormous number of adults, an attention I didn't particularly want. I was a child, and I was quite happy getting on with my own recreations and self-invented entertainments. But looking back, of course, I squandered the opportunity to play table tennis with some of the great actors of the day. I did play table tennis with some of them, but I could have, if I'd known. Well, it's easy to say looking back. I certainly didn't take advantage of all the opportunities that were there for me. Nor do the Stephen children, I'm sure, when it came to all the celebrated acquaintances of Sir Leslie and his wife, and nor do the children take a huge advantage of Augustus Carmichael and the poet and other minor eminences, friends who come to join the Ramsay family to the Lighthouse. So there's all the affirmative activity that this rich cast of characters proposes to us to keep us interested, and unless we are in absolute need of high drama, of something more alarming and intense than the loss of a beloved grandmother's brooch on the beach, which is a source of great upset and alarm to people. I may have mentioned, because it's what comes straight into my mind, the day that my ex-wife lost her wedding ring in our front pasture. I was an academic at that time too, but I was also a goat farmer, and we had pasture occupied by our goats, and then suddenly one day by my wife's wedding ring. I think we found it. Isn't it strange that I don't remember? I think had we not found it, I would remember, because I remember only the terrible anxiety caused by its sudden disappearance. So these things can shake one's heart, the disappearance of a precious object. Whether that is enough to sustain a book, or perhaps a short story, is another matter, because almost any incident, no matter how small, can, in the hands of the right author, expose almost everything that is to be exposed about the human heart. However, into the Lighthouse, everything is relatively calm. There are enmities, envies, jealousies, hostilities between the family members, and in the case of Charles Tansley, the little atheist who takes Mr. Ramsay's part against poor young James and his desire to visit the lighthouse, which is a wonderful, interesting, strange object standing there right in the middle of view when you looked out to sea. And Mr. Ramsay has the unappealing quality of enjoying squelching, stamping on his children's dreams, and Tansley is a devotee of Mr. Ramsay, the philosopher, and his philosophies. And so he follows Mr. Ramsay in being cruel to James. And such things are painful, and often actually remain painful and are remembered. And you may, at this point in your life, feel that you'll be, if you're not already free of upsets of that kind, that's to say, apparently small, trivial upsets from your childhood, you may, to your surprise, discover that all through life, and right into your old age, if you will grant that that's what I have reached, that those pains are still present. The things that you could have sworn would be gone as the waves of living and greater dramas overtook them and smoothed them over. But actually they're still there, and they still hurt. So these little wars and battles that take the stage in the first half of To the Lighthouse are the kinds of things you do remember, as a matter of fact, but they're not the kind of thing that makes you want to turn the page necessarily, unless you are so taken with Virginia Woolf's style, her focus on the internal waves and turmoils of everybody's life, anybody's life. If you're sufficiently taken by that, you will not need larger storms. You will not need to replace a book like this with the Game of Thrones, because this will be not only adequate to your demands of a novel or of a drama, but more than adequate. This is what you've been waiting for, some readers feel, all your life in your reading, in your searching for a book that took you deeply into the human heart. You might feel, this is what I've been after, this measure of detail, and this inclusiveness in which you can leap from the mind and the heart of one character to another. So it may be absolutely what you've always been after. Then comes the extraordinary second part of the book called Time Passes, in which the focus is pulled from the animate, from people's behavior, to that of the inanimate. And it's a section of a novel entirely about the inanimate. It's about the house decaying during the period when the family that we met and got very involved with do not come. And they are swept out of view, swept off the stage, and replaced by the empty decor, steadily decaying, with sudden intrusions of very brief news flashes about the characters we got so involved in, news flashes about what happens to them during the First World War. And it's shocking, and an extraordinary stylistic stroke that nobody has ever tried to bring off in quite the same way. It's miraculous. It conveys to us how strange the intrusion of that war, its intrusion into everybody's life, its fatal intrusion, its absolute arbitrariness compared with the organic collapse of that house, the arbitrariness of a bomb that blows up poor Andrew, of the death that overtakes the ineffable, immortal Mrs. Ramsay, leaving everyone bereft, leaving her husband bereft as he extends his arm in the corridor one night and finds she doesn't come into his arms because she is no longer on the planet. So that extraordinary tour de force of a complete reversal of focus takes place in part two. And then we are mercifully granted a final section called The Lighthouse, when indeed we achieve the lighthouse. We get to the lighthouse, James's dream in the opening lines of the book. We get there, Mr. Ramsay gets there, alas, alone. And there's Cam and James are there, still hating their father, as they did at the beginning of the book. And yet it is in this final section that they discover forgiveness. They see the old boy as he is, not only as a petty tyrant, but as a sad and lonely old man. And they see the lighthouse not only as this rather extraordinary magical structure out on the verge of the sea, flashing light into their house. They see it as the crude structure that it is, the real lighthouse, not a pretty thing. This discovery juxtaposes the real lighthouse, the real Mr. Ramsay, with the imaginary, the dream, the unreal thing that we hold in our hearts as they hold the tyrannical Mr. Ramsay, their father, in their hearts for Cam and James, and as they hold the imaginary, the vision of the lighthouse in their heart. And at this moment, the end of this extraordinary book, the symbol, if you like, the symbolic Mr. Ramsay, the symbolic lighthouse, and the real are juxtaposed with, along with them, the question of which is the real. And Virginia Woolf, of course, comes to the only possible conclusion: they're both real. The imaginary, the symbolic, the dream, it's real, and the reality is real, the physical reality. And that is the extraordinary work of this novel in its supreme abstraction. As something I've mentioned in our last Zoom, Virginia's brilliance of intellect, which was never honed by school, by formal schooling, much less university schooling, her philosophical bent, which is evident in almost every line of this book, remains on a level of absolute simplicity. investigating the here versus the now, the there versus the here, physically as opposed to just temporally. And so she uses such simple words to investigate the most basic of all opposition, all oppositions that beset our everyday life and our experience of consciousness and of being alive, the vividness of which is her true subject. And for anyone who looks to the novel, as I certainly have all my life, to make life real, livingness real, here is a novel that is supremely real and reaches back to us saying, is this not the life you have lived? Is this not life as you have lived it? So the autobiographical elements of the story, which are many of the book, yield to the absolute universality of this great book. Thank you, my dears, for your patience.